Kia ora koutou, ko Douglas Walker tōku ingoa. I'm here tonight with some wonderful piloteers, the NCEA pilot team for the Nature of Science standards. And we've got with us, we've got Linda of Green Bay. We've got Ange of South Westland Area School. We've got Andrew of Aotea College. And we've got Chandar, and Chandar's currently having a few problems with his webcam, so we might just be hearing from Chandar, but it's really great to have you all with us. And tonight we're looking at Standard 1.4, which is Demonstrate Understanding of Science Claims in Communicated Information using māramatanga. And if you've got any questions as we go through and explore what this standard has meant for these pilot schools, if you'd like to pop any questions into the chat, please do so, and then we'll have some time at the end and we'll go through those questions and ask some of them of our pilot team. All right, kia ora, and thank you so much for being here, guys. If we could start off perhaps with a little bit about 1.4 and what it has looked like in your kura.
I guess I go first. It's a portfolio-based assessment, which has been really cool to have an external, and it meant for us that we could spread the load basically for the assessment, and we could break down the actual criteria for what a valid source was we broke it down into three sort of groups of things that went together quite well. We did the first one we were doing energy and food, and so we did one on supplements, looking at like sample size and placebos and that sort of stuff. We did one on, we used Mythbusters for one, that was on fair testing and methodology and all that sort of stuff, and finally one on climate change, which was misrepresentation of data, and it worked really well. We'd spread them out even further next time. The last two were a bit close together, but yeah, it was really good. It worked well for us.
Thanks, Linda. Who wants to jump in next?
I'll go next. At South Westland, we did some explicit teaching around validity and how to analyse a source of information and assess its trustworthiness. Tricked my kids with the tree octopus and the DHMO site, so they desperately needed some upskilling in that area. And then this term, so we did a little bit of that explicit validity teaching last term, a little bit earlier in the year as well, just sprinkled around. And then this term we came back and did a unit on haora and health, using Te Whare Tapewha to structure our thinking and what aspects of health we'd look into. And we just investigated claims relating to health and the different aspects of health for that portfolio. So we looked at sugar, is sugar or cholesterol worse for you? We looked at aromatherapy and the claims made about that. We looked at plant versus dairy milk from different perspectives. Kids got to choose what sources to analyse for their portfolio to put forward for the final assessment. And then as we finished that assessment, it flowed straight into a reassessment for the practical standard, also focused on health. So kind of a 2-for-1 there.
Yeah, so we thought we'd try and do some throughout the year, because obviously with it wasn't external, but because it was a portfolio-based external, we could kind of work on it at different points throughout the year, and it wasn't kind of like a half term of work and building up to an end of unit test and so on. So during the first part of the year, we were doing our 1.1 drugs in sport assessment, along with a kind of sporting and mainly sporting topic to do with lots of different things. But there's some of the science claims that came up during that topic were things like the different dieting fads that were around in nutrition and the different exercise fads. And so we kind of use those as practice for, as Ange says, developing those skills of, can you determine whether these claims are true? Just if they're biased or not, or are they credible, the claims that these people are making. We looked at some of the performance drugs and whether they actually, the claims that were being made by the drug agencies, whether they actually improved performance or not. So there's a little bit of early practice, I suppose, using those little contexts. And then with our second unit, we were talking about climate change. So there was obviously lots of claims around different things to do with climate change. So more practice at developing our skills. And then because we kind of finished our 1.2, which was on climate change and sea levels rising, we decided to open it up to virtually any claim that we could find interesting. And the students really grabbed on a couple of claims. I stole one idea off Chanda about vaping, and so they were really interested in getting on with that. In fact, I had a student, I thought about it today actually, we had a student who'd been absent for 2 months, and I got an email from them saying, "Hey, mister, I heard we're doing an assessment on vaping. Is there any possibility I can get on with it?" And so on and so on. And so obviously then it led on to other things to do with cannabis and claims about cannabis, especially with the referendum that we had at the last election. And so it just opened up a real a ton of ideas from all the students. So it was really great to kind of listen to some of their ideas rather than some of our ideas. And I don't think I ever got an email about asking if they could actually run into school and do a magnesium and acid rate of reaction investigation. So yeah, it was real nice to get that one email anyway.
Good on you, Andrew.
I guess our experiences are sort of similar to what the other people had as well. We did some teaching around how to evaluate credibility of claims. We also tried to sort of spread this standard over a longer period of time. And so when we were looking at diabetes and obesity and look at some claims around diet, when we're doing climate change, looking at some claims around climate, it didn't quite pan out because we were sort of busy with the other standards and this one did fall aside. But then when we started focusing on 1.4, you could still revisit those contexts and kids still understood, that we'd already learned all the stuff about diet and obesity, and now we were doing a claim based on that. So the ones we looked at was the first one we did was around there's a new drink called arepa. It's a blackcurrant drink that is supposedly improve brain function. And yeah, that one was fairly well done, as seeing as was our first one. We then looked at a climate change related one, the supplementation of red seaweed in cow feed. And then, we got into the vaping, and interest levels skyrocketed, of course. So it was looking at the levels of heavy metals in vapes. I don't know how much I did to dissuade kids from vaping, or it might have had the opposite effect of interest in vaping. Sort of like Andrew, we also then thought, let's follow interest of kids. And we are a largely South Pacific community, and kava drinking is a big aspect of life in our community. And so we stumbled across some research, maybe it was the NZASE one, around the impact of kava on brain function and judgment related to driving. And that one was really, really popular. So the way we did it was we did 4 different contexts, and then the kids got to decide which 3 they wanted to submit for marking. Yeah. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you, Chanda. Sounds like there was a real spread of context there and some really awesome ideas. What in the materials that you found that you used for 1.4 or that your students found and used, can you tell us anything in particular that you needed to look for in the material or the quotes or the articles that made it useful as opposed to, maybe too short or not including the right information?
Yeah, I think this was one of our struggles. The standard talks about pseudoscience, and to find enough evidence, enough information on a pseudoscientific kind of claim is hard because most of it doesn't exist. So we did focus more on science research and looking at why they were credible. Although, I read some of the reports from the Arepa drink one, and kids were picking up aspects like their sample size was too small, even though it was a research published in a scientific journal, or that they're only focused on athletes rather than the broader population. So, I'm still struggling a little bit on finding claims that are sort of pseudoscience kind of focused.
I must admit, I put my young ones in the team onto that one because that was a bit beyond my technical abilities. But they seemed to manage to find things okay, although they were really complaining about their whenever they did a search after that. How Google remembers where you've been going, and they just keep getting all this stuff come up of conspiracy theories. So yeah, they're still complaining about it, but that's okay. They found stuff.
Yeah, it was much the same. Finding a good pseudoscience source that would trick the kids a little bit, like the tree octopus and DHMO, was quite hard. And trying to find one that wasn't so obviously bad to really test them is really hard. And Google does remember what you search, and so I'm getting all these nice scientific articles, and I'm like, no, I want bad ones. It took a lot of searching, and you do end up gravitating towards longer documents. Like a snippet from social media usually does not have enough. You're not going to be able to talk about bias or misinterpretation of results or small sample size because you're not given that information in a small social media post. But in a larger infographic or an article on a website, you may have access to it. So that's where I found my pseudoscience.
Yeah, I just found it was difficult to find some claims that you thought would cover the area. The vaping claim actually that we looked at was a published paper that said vaping was as dangerous as smoking. And the great thing about it was a professor at a very good university in America. And of course, he had a very small sample size, and his results were all over the place. And it was just a great article for the kids to tear apart, especially 15, 16-year-old kids to basically write a little report to say how wrong the professor is and his results are. It was great. So it was really interesting, but difficult to find some really good claims that they can really get their kind of teeth into, but not impossible. So I'm sure as we build up our bank of resources, that then we can build that bank up to quite a big bank.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, guys. How did you? So in the standard, there's the term māramatanga, and I know it's in the explanatory notes, but could you talk to us a little bit about how significant this is in the standard and how you explored it with the students?
Shall I start with that one?
Go for it.
I went back to when us piloteers were at the NZQA workshop at the start of the year, talking to our Māori experts from NZQA about this, and they helped me focus in on the idea that māramatanga is basically about enlightenment, and it's similar to, maybe not quite the same as, critical thinking skills. So I kind of pitched it to my kids as we are trying to give you the skills you need to be enlightened, to figure out what is and isn't legit. We use the word legit quite a bit, and māramatanga is the idea that you can look at something and figure out if it is legit, if it is valid, how accurate something is. So that was how we pitched it. We used the words critical thinking quite a lot. but we also just said māramatanga until we were blue in the face. So hopefully my students have some understanding of that word now.
I admit I had to re-look it up because I've forgotten all about it. But we used we drew from the you need science an understanding of science ideas and science information to be able to have the insight to actually decide whether something was valid or not. And we used legit and all those words that the kids use because they were doing the talking.
Yeah, I think the difference with this standard compared to the other ones, where you know, te ao is something that you have to teach, or in the socio-scientific one, kaitiakitanga is something that you deliberately have to teach and get across to the kids. Whereas, you know, if we're talking about thinking and using evidence, if that's our explanation of māramatanga, we are doing that inherently, I guess, when we are teaching kids how to validate a claim. So I think we focus less on the te reo in this standard than we have in other standards.
Yeah, I think it's just keeping on their case. You know, if they're asking you if you know, something simple like a particular website, like a .com, is reliable, I'd always turn it back and say, well, what do you think? You know, and why do you think that? And that kind of, you know, if you just keep turning it back on the students, you know, what do you think it's biased? You know, what are your reasons for thinking it's biased or not credible or things like that? So that's the way that I found work quite well with the students that with this particular topic anyway, that you just kind of just get them thinking about it rather than you giving them the answers, and then obviously the māramatanga or the insight will eventually come.
Okay, hi, thank you. You mentioned that it's a portfolio assessed standard now, and in previous years that was slightly different. I remember talking to some of you about that last year. Could you highlight the changes that have taken place from the pilots last year, and what challenges that has thrown up for you?
I think last year it was a car, and they provided the content, the little stories and the questions, and it wasn't so great for the kids. This is so much better because the actual assessment and the actual understanding of validity comes out of what you're learning. So you're learning the science ideas, and then you're using them to actually validate a claim, which is much better than what they did last year with a novel context, because it wasn't as authentic in the actual assessment, I think, maybe.
So we opted out of this standard last year because it was an external at the end of the year, and Auckland had gone through that lengthy lockdown. So we didn't really get an opportunity to teach the standard, so why assess it? And when I looked at the car, I was glad we didn't do it because it was a shocker. So, you know, the NZASE had provided the resource, the context, and I really like the fact that we get to work out, even though it's hard to find these resources, I think I like the fact that we have control of providing the context for the kids. We can look for, you know, relevance, and we can look for interest and things like that. So from that point of view, I liked it. I guess my big niggle with the portfolio assessment is I don't know what the marking schedule is. I have no idea what they're going to mark our kids' work on. I've submitted, you know, all these pieces of work, and yeah, that's the one that's bugging me at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, last year the context was completely out of our mind. We had no idea what to prep the kids for, I think, and we ended up with really heavy science. Like, it was a lot for our kids to process. Whereas this year, by being able to pick the context and the sources ourselves, we can target our students. I know I certainly didn't give them, not my cohort, a scientific paper because my kids couldn't process that, which could open up the door, I guess, to are you restricting kids from excellence? But just finding contexts that suit your kids' interests, I think, gave us a lot more freedom and allowed our kids to be their best. Like Andrew and Chanda said, they got to talk about vaping and had kids excited about the topic. My kids were excited about aromatherapy. Maybe not as excited about vaping, but yeah.
Yeah, we didn't do the pilot last year, so kind of like in the same boat as Chanda really. But yeah, quite glad that that it is opened up. And just to go with Ange, we did look at astrology, but after about 10 minutes, they decided that science had proved it wrong, so we moved on, which is a bit of a shame, of course.
Thank you, guys. Chanda, just to come back to one of the points you made there, you talked about uploading the work. I'm guessing that for some of the larger schools that you represent, that could have been a bit of a task. Can you talk to us about how that worked?
Nightmare. Okay. Individual kids' work needs to be uploaded against the kid's name with a matching NSN number. And on our SMS, we've got NSN numbers with a 0 at the beginning of it, but we have to upload it without the 0. These are all things we learned while trying to do it. It was a nightmare, and I had 130 odd. I think Linda has a lot more. Our PN decided he was going to wait for the last day to upload it, and we hit all these roadblocks. It was thanks to these guys. They gave me some really good advice that we managed to start getting things in the right format to upload. Yeah, so plan ahead, I guess, would be.
Thanks, Chanda. The deadline for this portfolio was term 3, week 5. Andrew, I know that Aotea have been piloting a large number of subjects this year. I think maybe about 6, I remember you telling me, but I could be wrong. Have you encountered any sort of bottlenecks with other subjects also having assessments at similar times?
Yeah, I suppose with the science one being a portfolio, it was definitely easier for us to deal with. We just had to make sure that those, the students' work was in a particular format, under a certain size, and have it ready to upload. So, we've got 2 science classes, 5 chemistry bio classes, and 3 physics classes just as part of the science thing. But of course, they've got their own CAAs going on. So it was great for me anyway to have that portfolio. But yes, with all these other subjects that we've got in school doing different pilots, it did cause a few issues, in school with devices available, rooming at the same time or the next day. I think we had 2 or 3 in a week, and that of course causes issues with other classrooms, having to move, other students having to move, and finding these quiet spaces for these CAAs to be done. So, obviously it's a trial, so it's these sorts of issues will be ironed out, I'm sure. But it did cause a few issues with some staff. Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. In the material that's on the new NCEA website, the sort of scaffolding and guidance seems to be mentioned quite a lot. How did you determine what was the appropriate level of guidance to give students?
That was a tricky one. There was a lot of discussion on that one, and we didn't get our way, but that's okay. It was really quite difficult, and we found out. I think we started a lot earlier with our portfolio, and we found out, I think it was the day before we started them all, that you can actually read through the resource with the class, and because a lot of the resources have big sciencey words that you sometimes have to explain, and it's not fair that the kids have to try and decipher those. So you can explain those words, and then you give the kids a bit of time to discuss it amongst themselves, not the teacher, but they can discuss it amongst themselves. And then it's exam conditions. And that was actually, first of all, it was really hard to get them to understand that this was an external assessment in the middle of the year, because that's not right. It doesn't happen that way. It was hard to get parents to understand. It was hard to get other teachers to understand. And then having them talking and then stopping them and saying, okay, we're in exam conditions now. Yeah, that was interesting, but it was okay. We made it.
Yeah, I did something similar. I ran mine maybe even more exam-y, because I did not explain the tricky words to my kids, because I thought that they had to identify it, and explaining it would help them get towards merit. Maybe I'm, still waiting to see if that's true or not based on the results. But I definitely ran it under exam conditions, no talking to each other. We watched one of the videos, which was a source together as a class, but no discussion between the students. And then I locked their documents when they weren't in the room. But next year, based on feedback and our discussions as piloteers, I think I'm just going to run it like an internal, and just caution them like we would in an internal. It's going to be your own work. I think it will just be more like an internal moving forward.
Yeah, so I think we got clarification on the conditions quite late from NZQA, and I think some of the schools had already started with their initial claims. So by the time we started, we had this clarification, and the clarification was it does not need to be so much the exam conditions, that it still needs to be individual student work, and it will be marked externally, and that was the external component. So we have 4 periods of science in a week. On the first day of the week, we gave out the claim. The students were able to be in little groups and discuss amongst their groups on the claim, and sort of understand what the claim was. Because like you say, Ange, if you don't understand it, how can you look at the credibility? They were allowed to make notes from their discussions, and then we went to individual work. And they had the rest of the week to complete their individual work. So we did run it pretty much like an internal assessment. And, they had access to their work outside of class time. So if they wanted, they could amend their work or add to it. But yeah, we weren't so hard and fast on the conditions.
Yeah, the only thing that we that I could add is, there was a lack of kind of scaffolding. We weren't allowed to obviously scaffold the kids, it being an external, and we had to kind of treat it like an external, and just not giving that, not being tempted to give that feedback as a teacher when the kids are working on something. It was very, very difficult. Come and have a look at this. What do you think of this? No, you just do what you have to do. What do you think it's this? So it's very, very difficult. And then the plagiarism thing as well, because obviously after the lesson, or any time that they're talking about those claims, because a lot of them did the vaping claim, they would be talking about it at break time and so on. So just making sure that that plagiarism thing was reinforced. That I told them almost every day, this is going to be marked by NZQA, an external moderator, an external marker. You got to make sure that your words, the words that you're using, are not the same as somebody else's, and just the worry of that, it's sending work off, because we didn't do it in full exam in conditions inside the classroom. The kids were sitting in different places, but there was the odd bit of chatter in between, not about the claims, but mostly just general chit chat. So there's always that worry about plagiarism as well, with this one being done in the classroom and sent off at some point over a long period of time.
Thank you, team. You've talked a little bit about the enthusiasm of some of your students for the contexts that either you or they identified throughout the course of the year so far. Are there any other takeaways that your students have had from this? Anything that you've observed or that your students have said to you that's been relevant to this teaching and learning?
My guys have been really, really, really angry that people would do this to them. It's just terrible. How could they lie to us? Or how could they be so stupid? So, yeah, it's been fun. The kids have actually enjoyed it, and I think that they have learnt something valuable out of it.
My students were really angry. I kept tricking them. Why would you do this to us? They really liked feeling like critiquers, like they were the boss people coming in and being like, this professional is doing it wrong, or like they felt powerful when they were able to identify particularly people who were with a vested interest because they were making money off of a product. They really liked being able to identify that and as a reason to be more skeptical of the claims. So I think they felt quite good about themselves doing this, which was nice.
Yeah, I'll go next. Just to repeat those guys there, just about the fact that they were really enjoying being the professional in the room, even though they were like critiquing the professional. But I had one kid who did the vaping, a claim about vaping, and then the other claim was about cannabis, and I thought, okay, where's this going? And it's one of our students who's not there an awful lot, and I suddenly got a hand up, and it was, can I do a claim about nuclear power? Now, if I'd have said, we're going to do a claim about nuclear power today, I'm pretty sure they'd have all groaned and put their head on the desk. So it startled me anyway. So just little gems like that pop up from time to time. So that was one.
Sorry. I don't really have any of those little anecdotes, just because I don't actually teach the Year 11s this year. Although when getting all their PDFs to send off to NZQA, I'd have a read of them, and I really, really enjoyed some of the stuff that kids had written. One that sort of comes to mind is a resource that I put together and clearly stated on there that this was written by myself, teacher as a student resource. Because one of the things the kids have to think about is who the audience is. And one of the kids wrote that this resource has been written by a science teacher who's not an expert in microbiology. And it felt really, really slammed because, he's not the expert. And if it had been written by an expert, it would have a lot more detail. I guess, that's the kind of thinking that this standard really, really is encouraging, to think about who is writing it and who it is written for, and things like the language it's used. So I was quite happy with that. Yeah.
Thank you for that feedback, team. With the thought processes that are in your stage looking ahead to next year now, is there any advice that you would give other schools around using particularly the NOS standards that you've had some very intimate experience with for next year in courses?
I'd say make sure that the assessments come out of the learning as you go through. Take advantage of the way that you can just do parts of an assessment throughout the year as they fit with what the kids are learning about. That has been really, really useful. It spreads the load for them. It kind of spreads the load for you as well as a teacher. It's, you're doing little bits of marking rather than having that huge paper of 3 questions and loads and loads and loads of writing lines. Just make sure the assessments come out of the learning rather than having to teach to the assessment.
And this standard's quite a funny one, because I think that if you provide room for your kids, like Andrew did a great job of this, I think, room for your kids to pursue claims that they are personally interested in, that maybe don't fit into the unit of work you'd planned, you'll get really valuable learning out of it. Like I have come to quite enjoy these NOS standards, and I'll be sticking with them, I think, even after the pilot, because I like the freedom of being able to look at my year and ask, what do I want to teach, what's relevant to my kids, and what do my kids want to learn about, and then the assessment falls out of that, like Linda says. And this is a really fun standard, because you can just make kind of not a gap, but you make space in your unit to go off on those tangents and find out more about what your kids want to learn about and make it meaningful to them.
Yeah, I'll repeat a little bit of what Linda said. Actually, it's just great that you don't have a little block of 5 weeks where you do a particular standard and then you assess it right at the end. That actually you can pick points throughout the year, especially for this one, where you can take at least one of the claims early on in the year and then another one halfway through the year. And so it's kind of like not a big rush at the end to kind of get all of these claims in for the assessment. And next year we did the drugs in sport assessment, and it was a topic about Hawara and Te Wharatapa Whā. And that's something I'm thinking I would maybe next year get the vaping in there early, and so that would interest them early on. Little things like that, where I didn't actually think about it until we got after all of the other stuff, and thought, right, let's do some more claims to finish off and pick our best 3. And then the vaping thing exploded. So it was a shame that I didn't do it earlier in the year, and there's no reason why I couldn't now.
Yeah, for us, I mean, I also think that if we had started looking at students writing up that claims early in the year, and then they would have had an opportunity to choose their best 3 from a bigger portfolio, and that's something I'm sort of thinking about. But I think what I'm starting to appreciate is how the NOS standards actually work with each other. That there's overlap between them. So for this one, kids were writing about things that they had learned when we were talking about the investigative approaches. So kids were talking about things like it's a fair test because they control the variables, or what they're showing is a correlation. So that was really nice that some of those aspects that we had done in term 1 was coming through in the standard. So I quite like that.
Just to come back round to Linda's point again, I think Ange's already kind of covered this one quite nicely for her. Linda, you mentioned, focusing on what the kids are learning about. In terms of those that I don't know, like a unit plan or a context for the year, how would you go about identifying that?
We've got things pretty much all mixed in together, and we're looking more at the context that we're learning. So like we started this year with all about me, we've called it, and looking at energy and where we get our energy from and how we use our energy. So it was a mixture of biology, chemistry, and physics, with energy transfers and covalent bonding and sugar and all that sort of stuff. So as we went through that, we were doing sets of investigations and preparing them for that, and we were doing validity claims and preparing them for that, and some features of science as well, and we were bringing that through as well. So it's just a matter of, as you're putting it together, look for where these things just hit the mark. We colour code each one, so this one is about this assessment and this one, and then by the time they get through term 1, halfway through term 2, they're getting the hang of the fact that there's all these things and they all work together, and that's the way science is. So
Brilliant, thank you. I'll say hello to Catherine. I saw Catherine's popped on. Hope you're doing well, Catherine. Have we got any questions in the chat or from yourself, Catherine?
Yeah, we do have a couple. So how do you decide what knowledge or ideas from the context strands in the curriculum to cover before exploring claims? That's one.
I made a Padlet and I had all the big ideas in science along the top row, and then I had all the achievement standards as they were written along one side, and then I had a third side with the New Zealand curriculum strands, and then I threw in ideas in the middle about what I wanted to teach, what my kids were interested in, and what's relevant, and then I just tried to make sure that everything was linked to something. So I have a very messy spider web where, for me personally, I tried to hit each strand, do a biology-heavy topic, do a chemistry-heavy topic, do a physics-heavy topic, and do an earth and space science-heavy topic. Although next year I'd really like to do more space with the kids. We did a lot of earthy stuff this year. And then from there I tried to hit everything at least once, and keeping my kids' interests in mind. I've got some prospective biology students, so we did quite a bit of biology this year.
We had those three sides. We had a fourth side of what we wanted the kids to actually know going into level 2 as well. So what that foundation knowledge was, the really, really important stuff. And so we had the 4 sides in ours. And we also in science capabilities as well, because they go with the skills and the NOS, and it was quite the spider web. So yeah, it was quite some time and quite some nutting out, especially trying to cut back on what we want them to know. What was the really important stuff for level 2? It was quite hard. But we also kind of followed Pepeha. We start the year with a Pepeha, and then we look at we've split it into the 5 spheres, and you've got your mountain and your water and all of that, so the spheres, and then we've also got the whakapapa and the how you interactions and interconnections and stuff. So we haven't quite got there yet, but that's the idea.
Yeah, our planning was sort of more similar to Ange. The only difference would be, I guess, is Planet Earth and Earth Science is not the one, is probably the one that's the weakest. Although that's not too different to what we were doing previously, because if we tended to follow the NCEA Science standards, genetics, acids and bases, and mechanics. So from previous NCEA to now, the content, yes, it's less, but we are still covering the basics of those 3 areas.
Yeah, we did very similar to Ange. We kind of sat down at the start of the year and mapped it all out and made sure that we tried not to forget anything. And our first unit was very kind of biology and physics related, I suppose. We had mechanics in there, we had biomechanics in there to do with sport and hauora, and a lot of biology, obviously. But a little bit of chemistry in there when we did stuff to do with diet and nutrition. And obviously then when we actually got onto the drugs, there was a lot more chemistry to talk about there. But we really focused on chemistry in the second term when we did an energy and fuels topic, and then tried to fit in as much as we possibly could with those other things that we'd missed out. So it wasn't easy, but it's definitely definitely possible to get most of it in, despite doing our other stuff that we're trying to do in the background.
Cool. I think there's another question, and I think it was similar. It was linking, asking, were you thinking specifically about nature of science or the capabilities, or drawing purely from achievements and requirements? But I think your responses kind of summed all of that up. So that was cool. Thanks. And another question that we have, did the whole class do the same claim, or did different students explore different claims?
I think, sorry.
You go,
I think for manageability, our classes did the same claims, but the twist that we had was we did 4, and then kids chose the 3 to submit to NZQA. So it may, from NZQA's point, it may look like they've done different claims, but yeah, just for manageability, we sort of ran the same claims with the classes.
It's just because it was so different this year. I think we needed to have a bit more control over it this year. All the classes doing the same one. Going forward, probably not, but just this time round we did.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I did the same. I gave my kids a choice of 5 potential claims to pick from, and they picked 3 to respond to for the final portfolio that we hadn't looked at in class. But during the learning, my kids looked at, like, they would choose a source out of several I provided and explore their own claims that way.
Yeah, same. We gave them, I think it was 5 or 6 claims that they could choose from, but that list then expanded once they found some of their own claims. So we kind of just added them to the list that all students could choose from. So I think we ended up with about 12 different claims. In the end, yeah.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, that sounds great. A list of 12 is pretty good, considering it's your first crack at it. So hopefully you share that with everyone else. Last question that I have is, did you find that there was one type of source that was better at finding information for students, or videos or magazine articles or newspaper articles, just for those looking? No?
For me, it was my young ones and my team. That was a really good source.
My kids really liked visual sources. They liked videos that they could pause and take notes on. They liked infographics where they used the snipping tool a lot, even for the final portfolio. They, rather than trying to describe the graph and what was wrong with it, they would take a little snip of it, put it in their work, in their response, and then it's right there for them to talk about. Hopefully next year I'll get some kids actually taking a snip and then drawing on it what's wrong with it. I think would be really cool. So visual stuff really worked well for my group.
Cool.
We mainly used, obviously, websites, but the students were definitely interested if there was a video on there trying to explain something. And we did something in year 10 on Seaspiracy on Netflix as something for year 10s to examine that claim. And some of them obviously remembered that from last year and were asking me whether they could do the Seaspiracy thing. But I thought, well, you did it last year, so no, you're not doing it this year. You're going to choose something else and kind of develop your kind of skills on something else. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think as we mentioned earlier, one resource does not provide enough guts to really sort of pull it apart and have enough evidence and information to actually write a report. So a lot of our ones were almost like a conglomerate of different resources. So might have a video or something from a website, a link to a website, as well as added bits from the teacher. And they use that as their resource, and I think that sort of aligns with the way we look for credibility in a claim. We don't just use one resource. We don't just use one 3-minute advert. We would go and read up in other areas as well, and so I quite like the fact that it's more than one source. It's multiple sources of information.
I'll throw one more in. If you're anything like our school, course selection is kicking off round about now. For the students that have been going through your Nature of Science course, what or how has that affected course selection for them next year, and how have you dealt with that?
For us, sorry, you go Ed.
Small school, it's easy. I talk to my kids, so talk to them too much. I know what they are interested in and where they're heading. We have lots of those one-on-one conversations, and so as they express an interest in a particular branch of science, we explore it a little bit more in class, and I can see they want to do it at level 2, so we make sure that they've got that groundwork. Bigger schools, good luck to you.
I guess we're the biggest school, so we're just getting, the numbers are still the same, because we made it a point of, when we put the course together, making sure that we had the foundation knowledge that we wanted the students to know going into level 2 for biochem physics. They do have it, but they have different foundation knowledge to our kids who go through the individual science courses, which it's been a bit of an adjustment at level 2 teaching, but in some places those doing the old NCEA know more and are really good, but then they're completely lacking in other areas where the kids from the general science course have a bit of knowledge to move forward from. So it evens out a bit.
Yeah, we've actually got our selection day this Friday, and so we've been talking for a couple of weeks now with all of our students, and I suppose we're in a different position. We've got a lot of our Year 11 students doing chemistry and biology or physics rather than just science, and some of them have taken 2 subjects. So there's, there'll be we're expecting quite a good uptake of level 2 that the pilot hasn't really got in the way of that, and possibly might have increased our numbers at level 2 if there is a big kind of push from those chem bio and physics classes, that they have really taken it on board throughout the year, and they're really interested in those particular subjects now, that there's no reason why they won't take it up. But yeah, the science students that just take science, that they're pretty enthusiastic about doing science next year, the ones that I've spoken to. So yeah, it's been pretty good feedback so far.
So our enrollments in the Chem Biophys for this year wasn't really affected greatly from doing the pilot last year. So I can't imagine it would be affected for next year. If anything, my bio numbers went up this year. We've ended up with 2 bio classes at year. Sorry, forget that. It's year 11, so that doesn't affect that. So basically, my numbers at year 12 have not been impacted by kids doing NOS-focused science in year 11. And I guess probably the other question would be, has achievement been impacted? So we've only done the internals, and it doesn't seem to have affected internal results so far. So we'll wait for the externals.
Brilliant, thank you, and it's great to tie that into to evidence, Chanda. Are there any other last questions, Catherine, in the chat?
Yep, there's one last one. Were there any ethical issues or tensions? So, for example, students wanted to explore a claim that someone at home strongly believes.
Oh yeah, last year. We tried to do the vaccination one right in the thick of the vaccination. Oh, that was hilarious. It was good. There was a few letters, but and we come from an area that there might be a number of conspiracy theorists where we live. So we have some pretty robust discussions, and we get a few parent emails, but it's a standard, and the kids are welcome to make their own decision on validity. That's not what they're being marked on. They're being marked on their ability to use māramatanga for backing up their decision, really. So.
Yeah, West Coast, we have a lot of this stuff in the classroom impacts or correlates with the stuff at home. And I really liked the standard because, like Linda said, the emphasis is on using evidence to back up their claims. And when we're looking at a single source and critiquing that source's validity, it's much easier to remove or separate. That's the word I'm looking for. Separate this conspiracy, this idea that maybe isn't founded on science from the single source. So I didn't get a single letter or call from home because I always tied it back to, okay, so what about this source, like this infographic? How do you feel about it? What would make it better is a phrase I used a lot. What would make it more convincing, more accurate, more believable? And so I had no issues with that. And I, just talking with the kids about what ideas they want to explore and just trying to be sensitive to how I presented the context. Like we talk a lot about the placebo effect as well. I used aromatherapy as an example of pseudoscience. But me and the kids also made bath bombs and used aromatherapy in our bath bombs because it's fun and who's it hurting. So there definitely was that tension. But the standard, I think, is easier than some other standards to navigate that tension.
Yeah, I'm not sure we got any backlash from any parents at home about anything that the students took up. So yeah, just backing up Angie, it's more about the looking at the science and seeing whether you think it's biased or is it correlation or causation or validity, and is it credible, and it's that sort of thing that kind of sideswipes them into getting onto that rather than just spouting on about the science all the time.
Yeah, ditto. No real sort of backlash from the community about our science claims. But just sort of an interesting point on that is when we looked at the arepa blackcurrant drink, I know when I looked at the science evidence, I was thinking some of this is not very conclusive. But some of the kids picked up on that. So there wasn't a definitive answer that this is good science or this is not good science. What it was about was, if you claim that it's good science, how are you backing it up? Or if you're saying it's not actually good science, what is your justification for that? And I think next year I want to look at some more the grey claims rather than the clear black and white claims.
Brilliant. There's some really good questions from our audience there, and I'd just like to say thank you for putting those in. And a massive thank you, of course, to Linda, to Anne, to Chandar, to Andrew, and to yourself, Catherine. Thanks for coming along and fielding those. Our next webinar, the last one, looking at 1.3, which is assessed, I think, later in the year, is on November the 14th, and so you should be able to hopefully join us for that one and continue the discussion. So once again, thank you to everybody, those that are watching and those that have been involved in the pilots. Really appreciate all of your time and effort throughout the course of the year, but especially tonight for coming on and sharing your learning with the rest of us. It's been really helpful and very inspirational. Thank you, and have a lovely evening.